Alright, it's been a while, and this video is actually going to be rather difficult to put together, so I'm just going to cut audio together. We can start by saying that we have had major successes. We could also say that we have jumped quite a few hurdles and been through some trials and tribulations. We can start with Ewa and the Justice's closing argument in relation to the claims made by Fixated Persons New South Wales. Now, here we talk about Kiskonen versus New South Wales 2021 in the Supreme Court of New South Wales before a Justice Lonergan. We can actually start by saying that Ewa has actually done nothing wrong. He didn't break any laws and was attacked by Fixated Persons New South Wales while attending a war memorial in the city of Sydney. Most people can't read what this document actually says, and it would be important to read it forwards and then in reverse to kind of get a picture or feeling for what it conveys. But Ewa made claims at which Matthew Reason of the Fixated Persons Unit in New South Wales had beliefs that Ewa's beliefs were, and I quote, delusional, wherein Fixated Persons Unit then did inform the Forensic Mental Health Unit within the Corrective Services facility where Ewa was incarcerated about these so-called delusions. This is very important in that this now proves that the state is willing to play mind games over your very own freedom. Ewa had made claims, and those claims are now written on the court record. And Justice Lonergan has now confirmed those claims as being a right, specifically a curial right. It's also evident that since this decision has been published, that the Australian government has fast moved to counter it. This is important because in 2015, I too presented this right before a magistrate, David Halpin, in the Lismore Magistrates Court of New South Wales. I was removed from David Halpin's court without contempt, without sentencing, and without having gone through any formal process or trial. I was incarcerated in the New South Wales Correctional Services facilities, wherein this Forensic Mental Health did attempt to attack me on a weekly basis and attempt to get me to submit to what they would call correcting. This is important because it shows that the modus operandi of the state of New South Wales was the same and worse for Ewa than it was for me for making the claim that is now defined by Justice Lonergan as being a right. It wasn't read properly at the time, and those that followed didn't see what it said. And slowly it got mocked. And it took me a bit of time to get to the point where I could sit down and read this document properly, Kiskonan versus New South Wales 2021. And as I did, I was shocked. I started to see that Justice Lonergan had laid out very clearly a path at which I had already opened the door to. This published document, this Justice's final assessment and findings in the case, started to present exactly the case argument that I had prepared relative to the actions of this Australian government. And over time, several things have happened that would add to what I have always said. And one of them is the Brereton Report, in that these are international war crimes committed by, I believe it was 13 Australian Defence Force soldiers while they were in field combat in Afghanistan. Some of these crimes included murdering civilians. The Brereton Report was done by Justice Brereton of the New South Wales Supreme Court, also the same Supreme Court as Justice Lonergan. Justice Lonergan's history is in the child sex abuse cases within the Catholic Church. This curial right, or standing that could be made against the state, has obviously scared the state enough to create state protection squads within their police forces, including fixated persons unit, where these officers are fixated on the very people they believe to be what they call now sovereign citizens. The problem being now is this right is now defined on the court record. And all three scenarios relative to this right have been seen by heads of New South Wales. We have Justice Brereton of the Supreme Court of New South Wales. We have Justice Lonergan of the Supreme Court of New South Wales. And we have David Halpin, merely a magistrate or ex-magistrate of the Magistrates Court of New South Wales. So this path has seen me go to jail under spurious circumstances. It's seen you go to jail under spurious circumstances. And it's seen justices of the Supreme Court contradict magistrates of the Magistrates Court. Now, why is this important? Because recently, United Nations inspectors came to visit facilities in the correctional services of New South Wales and Queensland and all the other states and territories. And during that visit, all states and territories complied except for Queensland and New South Wales. It hit me. It clicked. Totally clicked. And I'd been on the right path all along. This is where I took the document, the Kiskonan versus New South Wales 2021 document, and I scrutinised it. I reread Kiskonan versus New South Wales again, and a lot of things started to stick out. So I made a video series, Follow the Rabbit, is available on my YouTube channel, which I have been blocked or banned from again. It's in this that you'll start to see, as you move forward through the document, a progression of events occurs. But it's not until you start to read it backwards that you see that these events have consequences that bring out the reality of the actual event. There has been what I would call competition for some sort of hero-tard role that no one seems to know about, that has led to a lot of people flying flags and making claims that are off the mark or incorrect altogether. There is a danger in following this path of continued belligerence, given that a curial right puts a different set of rules upon the table, which may be complicated and obscure to some. It is clear within Kiskanen via New South Wales 2021 by the YouTube videos of you speaking that nothing wrong was said. Everything was said based on what your Prime Minister would call rule of law. Defining and discussing through the Follow the Rabbit series what was actually said in this court case has brought a rush of government propaganda. And this leads me to my next point before we look at why. Now, I received an email, and it turns out that it's from the ABC. Paul Farrell, abc.net.au. Hi Stephen, I hope you're well. My name's Paul Farrell. I'm a journalist with the ABC's Four Corners program. Paul, you need to update the blurb on the ABC website. It says you work for 7:30. We're working on a program at the moment about the origin of what's been described by some as the sovereign citizen movement in Australia. I understand your texts have been quite influential in Australia, and the group United Kingdom of Australia has become quite an important organisation here. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to speak on the phone. I would be interested in discussing your books, Realm and Man and Realm and Commonwealth. Regards, Paul Farrell, leaving his mobile phone number there with the little blurb about environment and crap about printing the email. So we've received correspondence from a government-funded media organisation wherein a journalist, who is freelance or not, has a history of data dumping. Now, what do I mean by that? He sat through all the Panama Papers and made a story out of the data dump. Much the same as what Washington Post would have done with Assange's data dumps. So he's a big fan of digging through the data on the connected internet. So Paul has won a crappy Kennedy Award, but he's also won a Walkley Award for his work in a Nauru data dump. And this would be detention centre related information. So some of the stories that he has been involved in reporting on have been relative to the work others have dumped on the internet. Now, I don't know how his lead into wanting to look into this sovereign citizen movement came about, but the terminology that he uses is very government propaganda usage. He hasn't made accusations. He has asked to look for the source of. And having been in this arena for 15 plus years, could say, Paul, there is no source. The propaganda that you look for is documented in the Kiskonan via New South Wales 2021 document. And by that I mean Matthew Reason of Fixated Persons New South Wales of the New South Wales Police Force stated it very clearly. It was their opinion that. And then the Justice made it very clear that this is a curial standing at which was being defined within a curially founded country. So this American pseudo-legal, words used by Matthew Reason in Kiskonan versus New South Wales, exists in the mind of the police. The source of this sovereign citizen movement might be Fixated Persons, which was created in this country, I believe, around 2009. They started handing Bearcat vehicles out. It should have been apparent when they built a fence around Parliament to protect themselves and gave the police rescue vehicles that looked like militarised Humvees. This is very important because an ABC journalist with some credibility, in that he's won awards and done work with some pretty high-profile media, although not in a full journalist capacity, has spent many hours looking through documents that have come through data dumps on the internet. And that's tedious work. I can congratulate him, given that Panama Papers was thousands and thousands of documents. The importance here is that Paul has titled the United Kingdom as important and not made accusations of its involvement in this sovereign citizen activity. We can see through Kiskonan via New South Wales 2021 the finalisation of a progression of events that started with David Halpin. And this is important because after publishing Follow the Rabbit, this flood of media started to happen across Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10. Now, I don't want to go into a shooting in Queensland that everyone knows to be very suspicious, but the timing and the action is relative given the accusations made by David Halpin within media responses. We have the Court of New South Wales, both Supreme and magistrates. We have United Nations inspectors wanting to inspect facilities at which you and I were both incarcerated in under very spurious circumstances. We have a journalist that has now titled what Justice Lonergan has told is a curial right. We have a curial-founded country wherein a police force is making accusations that American pseudo-legal theory is being used within a crown-founded country. All these things come to a head for a reason. Now, when I was incarcerated, technically I had done nothing wrong. When I was arrested, technically I had done nothing wrong. The same applied to Ewa. The progression of events that occurred within those facilities are the very, very events that the United Nations came here to inspect. And the fact that United Nations inspectors knocked on the door of corrections facilities in Queensland and New South Wales and were denied by both is very highly relevant to what we're talking about here. It's also evident that us knowing these things has caused a fury of media propaganda at the government end. Most of you won't put two and two together. And slowly I'm hoping that you will actually look, because everything I speak has been a fact that has been put on the court record and questioned. And this is why Justice Lonergan has defined a curial right and a standing that has been forged over many, many years of challenging a line of authority that doesn't exist in this country. Given United Nations inspectors, Justice Lonergan has detailed in Kiskonan via New South Wales 2021 closing argument that very specific crimes that have been committed within the facilities that United Nations inspectors attempted to visit. It is Ewa that has suffered the effects of that criminal offence. It is I that had suffered the effects of this criminal offence. So we have what we would call a credible journalist. Now, I have a history of working for and with some journalists, and the calibre at which he presents seems to be reasonable. And if he is of the Fourth Estate and has some sort of decency, he will look beyond what his agenda or angle is in relation to his requests. There is more to this story than what you are looking for, Paul. What Paul will begin to realize is what he's looking at is one of the most unique things that has been done in hundreds of years. The fact that these parties made agreements and settled into a state of peace and no war through Hague and Geneva Conventions has a direct relevance to the problem at hand. Now, if we were hundreds of years ago, we would have warred this out and it would be done and dusted. But we made agreements not to war against each other for the payment of debts. These international obligations stand and are ratified by the Australian government. This means that rule of law applies to the Australian government and its agents, and by the Australia Act 1986 makes the state its agent. While Paul is looking for the source of a sovereign citizen movement, he seems to have stepped into something that may change the face of this country forever. What Justice Lonergan has laid out and what United Nations inspectors came here to look for both combine, and the guilty parties, or the accused, are named by Justice Lonergan herself. The curial right that is defined was forged over many, many battles in a courtroom against justices in multiple states and the Northern Territory. What this journalist will come to realise is that the door that he's opened by mentioning my name has just opened a plethora of research that he may want to discuss. Some of this has never been published, Paul, but those justices know full well the capacity mentally of mind that I can prove. The delusion is upon them. Now, the importance here is that the United Nations inspectors came here specifically to enter corrections facilities in New South Wales, or all states, but were denied from New South Wales. We have a Justice Lonergan of the Supreme Court of New South Wales pointing out a series of events that have occurred within those facilities. We have a fixated persons unit that had targeted Ewa and attacked Ewa very openly, with admitted statements by Matthew Reason that he took command of multiple forces to get this job done. The relevance here is that the attack started by the state and then continued within the magistrate's court, where decision was made for incarceration in the very first. It's that first introduction into the jail system that leads you into what can only be found within corrective services, and that is this forensic mental health service. The importance of this is that Stephen has proven their words to be false. And not only false, a direct and structured attack that calls reality a delusion. This is very important, because now we've entered into the realm of mind. And who is to prove mind? It's a very important question when it comes to ignorance or nescience. Nescience is the not knowing, and ignorance is the not wanting to know. This then leads to mens rea and actus rea, a guilty mind, an act of guilt. These are the central foundations of the judicial system. The relevance of this can't be understated. The state has taken it upon itself to correct the mind of a delusion that does not exist. The United Nations came to this country to visit these facilities for a very specific reason. And if you look into their agenda, they were investigating these forensic mental health facilities for acts of torture. Now, torture defined at international law and even federal or state law is defined by Justice Lonergan as a criminal offence enacted by a whole list of names that are defined in Kiskanen versus New South Wales 2021. And this brings to relevance David Halpin being on propaganda media, as he was the one that initiated the very same things that occurred upon myself. See, as we stated, this was going to be a difficult video that's going to drag out. It needs to be said. It's been a difficult road. It's been a difficult task to prove a curial right against an administering force that is supposed to acknowledge that right but totally refuses to. A right of self-determination is detailed within the Attorney General's Department as a right afforded to all peoples. A curial right is a standing that defines a people. The state knows this. The state has denied this from the start. The state has not so much denied, but ignored and not answered and acted like it doesn't exist until now. It has gone into a propaganda overdrive, accusing everyone of being a sovereign citizen after it has been caught at its criminal activities. And these activities get far, far worse as the years progress. With the United Nations knocking on the door of the facilities that had incarcerated both you and myself, the difference being is the standing produced before these facilities by both myself and you, and the legal argument that has resulted in what can be defined as a curial standing. This standing has allowed international law to come to the foreground, defining the actions of not only forensic mental health, but Corrective Services New South Wales and all those parties that sought to incarcerate, attack, undermine, stop, are responsible. It's clearly evident now that having a curial right in international law before an administrating government under Hague Conventions with obligations to international humanitarian law, where United Nations inspectors came to visit facilities under those laws, laws which are touted to be rule of law, then the government should be obligated to all and sundry as well. And herein lies the conundrum for them. As an administering power, obligated to the United Nations, having denied United Nations inspectors into their facilities, having committed offences under the international humanitarian law, having those offences defined on Supreme Court record by a Justice of the Supreme Court itself, is in a precarious position given the standing has been defined as well. put a long story short, all of these people involved are now scared because they have been caught in an international criminal scandal called a war crime. And this is where we get back to Justice Brereton and the Brereton report being relative to the Australian Defence Force and an international standing while in duty in Afghanistan. This is very important because these justices know what's going on. If the justices of the New South Wales Supreme Court are handling international war crimes reports, then they know full well the standing that I presented to them and the argument that we have presented just now. This brings me to something relative to this curial standing that now cannot be denied. And it could be said that every action of fixated persons New South Wales made it a reality rather than a hope. And that is the New South Wales Crimes Act 1900. Now, obviously, the Crimes Act 1900 has been in existence since New South Wales turned from a colony into a state as it joined Federation under the Constitution. The Constitution is relevant to this argument and the curial standing defined by Justice Lonergan. Justice Lonergan is of the New South Wales Supreme Court, who defined this curial right, a standing which then would be relevant to the Crimes Act 1900 and the laws of compassing. Now, ABC have the Compass program, and it is pointed out to the court that it is this administering body that has been compassing the Commonwealth. This kind of finalises this right, this curial right and standing before this judicial system, in that a Supreme Court justice who is obligated to acknowledge all of the Criminal Code and the Crimes Act in New South Wales is in full knowledge of these laws. It could be then said that it would be illegal for this administering body to compass. This would open up a whole other door of things that are out of the scope of this discussion. This clarifies with certainty this curial position in international law, and this clarifies with certainty the obligations of this administering body under those international obligations. The arrival of United Nations inspectors to inspect facilities also indicates that they are under some sort of foreign administrative powers. These obligations then fall into those international humanitarian laws. Now, everybody speaks of a Nuremberg trial, blah, 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 but no one has had the standing to be able to make those accusations until Justice Lonergan defined that right within the Supreme Court of New South Wales, wherein Justice Brereton had defined war crimes activities under report in the Supreme Court of New South Wales. It's all important because David Halpin is on the media from the Magistrates Court of New South Wales defending the state, wherein actions within the Supreme Court defined Curial standing internationally, making him a responsible party to a criminal offence. This is difficult subject matter to approach, given that all these people involved in this storyline are now running like rats from a sinking ship. It could be said that they have been caught out in an international criminal scandal that involves torture, forced medical procedure, medical experimentation, and direct breaking of international criminal obligations under Rule 90 and Rule 92 of the International Humanitarian Law. The reason we have gone into depth is because we see that this journalist, Paul, has taken steps to find out the source of this sovereign citizen movement within Australia. He's just opened the door to the demise of this Australia as he knows it, given that that door has the United Nations written all over it. A curial standing before an international body at which accusations of war crimes activities can be made or could be made is a real threat and is a real apparent occurrence that is happening around them as we speak. I don't speak alone anymore. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of Australians that have come to this realization that a foreign entity has occupied and administered their soil. It's in this awakening that this sovereign citizen action has started to occur, and these accusations coming towards the people as being sovereign citizens when they are technically administered peoples are indicative of a fear within this established system that it may fall apart for them. Not many people would realize what I have actually been through or done. And the social media aspect of this has been a total mix of real people and state agents causing disruption, admitted by Matthew Reason in Kiskonan versus New South Wales 2021, that he was the responsible party for attempting to divide the kingdom. His attempt to divide what he is supposed to protect under international law goes further in that the state made an attack on a body with a curial right to remember its dead while on the grounds of a war memorial. This is an international criminal offence. The denial of a right to family is a criminal offence. The denial of a right to faith and religion is a criminal offence. And during the whole entire episode of trying to remember who we are, lest we forget in the morning we shall remember them, we have been attacked by the state for doing so, to the point of not having done anything wrong, and being incarcerated merely for having the mind to have a point of view outside of the state at which the state sought at its hardest to correct what it saw as a delusion, now proven wrong, meaning that all of forensic mental health in all states is merely quackery and a way for the state to indoctrinate with forced medical procedure, including the drugging of people to ensure that correction, has now become a war crime, a serious and heinous crime against humanity under the international humanitarian law. It's a harsh reality to come to. It's a reality that has now been proven before the judiciary, at which the judiciary has seen of mind of multiple judicial members to see fit that a curial right and standing is defined. The harsh reality here is that the New South Wales Police are directly responsible for attacking Ewa without cause, including invading his family home and disrupting and dividing his family. This then went on to the New South Wales courts at a magistrate's level, then refusing to, with due diligence, follow this rule of law and answer to questions of its line of authority. This direct refusal to answer is an act of force, at which could then be defined under slavery. What we have through Justice Lonergan is the proven actions of war crimes by New South Wales Police, New South Wales Magistrates Courts, handing that over to the New South Wales Corrective Services facilities, wherein they created international incident by denying inspectors to those facilities, wherein forensic mental health committed heinous criminal offences under Rule 92 of the international humanitarian law, wherein the drugging of Ewa Kiskonen, defined in Kiskonen versus New South Wales 2021, falls as war crimes activity. This means that all doctors responsible for this forced medical procedure are liable to International Criminal Tribunal. This means that corrective services officers that restrained and forced Dewar to follow these orders are liable to International Tribunal. This means that the police and magistrates that made those decisions to incarcerate in full knowledge of that curial standing are also responsible for a Rule 92 and Rule 90 offence. A Rule 90 offence is torture. A Rule 92 offence is medical procedure, including medical experimentation and forced medical procedure, which is happening within jail systems in all states of this country. These jail systems are run by this administrating power obligated to these international pacts, treaties, conventions, and so forth. This is why international humanitarian law applies and why your Prime Minister always touts following rule of law. It was almost as if Scott Morrison was giving a warning to premiers of the states during lockdowns in relation to a Rule 92 offence. That's outside of the scope of what we've proven here, but it is imperative that you look at what's occurred here to open that door. What we have before you is a closed case. They have acted. It has finished. They did what they did. The rules that apply were informed to them beforehand. This goes back as far as David Halpin in the New South Wales Magistrates Court being fully informed of that curial standing in 2015. Is it no wonder that we see his face on propaganda news all over the country? He is trying to detract from the fact that he has committed heinous international criminal offences that may have extended much further than myself and you are. He may be responsible for tens of thousands of others. This is the scope of what we have uncovered and proven within a courtroom. And here we have a journalist that is seeking to find how sovereign citizens are roaming all over the country flying flags that disagree with the blue ensign of this government. It has been no help with others attempting to copy or mimic without the standing that has been forged over many years before these judiciary to obtain what would be considered to be trust in a higher purpose, in that there is foundations of a country at risk here. This should be evident to you with the constant threats from the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, who said to you that you would own nothing and spoke about genetic modifications. Again, this is outside of the scope of what we discuss here, but the door that we open here is very clear when you understand and comprehend the scope of what has gone on in the last 3 or 4 years. What we can see very clearly is that a media propaganda arm and a state and federal system of men who are criminals at law are attempting to use this media machine to stop you from learning their delusion is false. This is the basic crux of the matter when it is proven within Kiskonen v New South Wales 2021 that a delusion was accused and can easily be proven false with curial standing. This is very serious when we then find out that the state is acting as guardian to a people that it is clearly manipulating to stay within a state of mind that would now be considered slavery at law. And the Slave Trade Act 1874 is very clear on how slavery is to be defined within the Commonwealth of Australia. being a curial country with a motherland that defined these things, the judiciary are fully aware of the slavery that is going on, but are unable to speak while under the command of a foreign curial force. It is up to us as a people to rise and take on that self-determination and curial right that is defined in the Attorney General's Department, as long as we adhere to rule of law. It can be said that catching them out as war criminals allows us easily to stand up to them and say no more, given that they have committed heinous criminal offences, not only in this case, but over many, many years, if not decades. In full knowledge that our leaders, our politicians, our representatives are actually war criminals, an international conspiracy wherein they actually did conspire together to commit these acts. It could be said that we should not listen to them anymore. It could be said that they are, in fact, some of the worst types of criminals that have ever existed. We could go on about how people of history have described the actions that are occurring now, but the basic bottom line is that the state is treating you as a slave with force. Pure force that is against every law that it is supposed to uphold, and has been doing this for a very long time. This then leads to fraud and deceit and failures of administration and a will and want to undermine the people's authority, very, very clearly demonstrated by the actions of John Howard while he was in power. Like I said, very difficult subject matter to approach. Could go outside of the scope of this argument very clearly and very easily, bringing a full-scope international criminal offence against a large party of people in this country who have sought to undermine or gain wealth for themselves from the knowledge that you are a occupied and manipulated people. They are slave drivers that have privatized, as privateers, all of your government assets which belong to you, the people, while they have undermined your public trust and indebted you further when you could have got out of debt internationally, and they continue to manipulate you in a debt game while they use you as the fodder to pay off the debts that they create. This is the simplistic view of it all, but in doing that, they have overstepped the line very clearly and broken their own rules and committed international war crimes. This is why you are seeing them scramble like rats, running from a sinking ship while they send their reporters in looking for a false lead. Paul now has the opportunity to dig into reality rather than their delusion. And it's up to Paul, the journalist from Four Corners, to supersede Louise Milligan where she failed very clearly and allowed George Pell to walk free from a courtroom where he was very clearly guilty of the crimes that he had committed. And a curial standing might add to the knowledge that she should have known at the time, Paul. This is why I showed skepticism in your work, given that it's just data dumping. You need to dig into who I am a little bit more and find out that I'm a pretty smart cookie when it comes to some of these things, Paul. I know what you do. Do you know what I do? I'm hoping after an hour, it's taken a few hours to edit this together, you might come to some sort of realization that something very big has been done, and the fear that it has caused in the people that have committed the crimes is evident. It is evident to me anyway. It may not be evident to a journalist who does data dumping and hasn't looked into the history of the country that he actually lives in. Now, Nauru comes under a Nauru Act 1907. Why? Hague Conventions 1907. What agreements were made over Nauru that you probably don't know from your data dumping? I'm not sure about the credibility of this guy, which is why I've laid out a full hour that will open the door to many questions and many trails of evidence that have been left across territories and states, while I've done this over the last 15 years, trying to prove and put on record everything that I said 15 years ago. And it could be said to those that have been playing to look around the table at who's been trying to stop you. This might indicate to you in your social media world what's going on. Now that the political storm has ended and you realize these people built a fence around the parliament and fed themselves militarized weapons and bearcat rescue vehicles to rescue politicians from a population awakening from an occupation, you might start to realize what they've been planning for the last 4 years. Longer. And as you step into a moneyless society, you walk further into privateered slavery, you become owned like cattle. And this is where genetic modification might be your indicator. If they link your DNA to a financial system, what do you think you are in your freedom of choice? Who are they targeting? Why? What is this game? What's going to happen? They're going to try and keep command of this country at all costs. Tomorrow, when the war began, already gave you the answers. They're coming for you because you owe lots of money in an international debt game where they believe they have the authority to squeeze it out of you like the blood from a stone. A curial standing has proven them wrong. It has also demonstrated that while doing what they do, they have become international war criminals in their efforts, and this is why you are seeing the sovereign citizen propaganda coming from this very government itself. No one in this movement ever called us sovereign citizens. We know what a Bancroft Agreement, Convention and Treaty is. Look that one up, Paul. Let me ask a question of all of you that you may not be able to answer. Who are you? And with that, I'll leave you to it, because that's a very long discussion for you to listen to over and over again until it sinks in that the people that have been managing your states are actually war criminals